Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Seekers Forum. I hope you're having a very good weekend. And let's say hi to Jay Copley. How are you, Jay?
Hello, Mark. Good to see everyone.
Nice to see you. So, this month, we're going to be looking at learning to listen, the art of conscious witnessing. Now, I want to welcome our many new members, give a special shout out. It's really great to have you with us. The Seekers Forum is moving into its 10th year, and we're entering a new growth phase. And I think this is really important, particularly in this era of global turmoil and information barraging us from every direction. It's more important than ever to have a space to be able to drop out of all the noise, to regather our energy, and to put the focus back where it belongs, which is on our spiritual lives and the path of wisdom. So I'm very happy that our community is growing and that we can support one another in this difficult time as we move toward living more awakened lives. Now, with so much commotion and noise in the atmosphere, the practice of deep listening is absolutely paramount, and it has a sacred purpose in our lives. My friend and colleague Mark Nepo likes to put it this way. He says, quote, "In real ways, we are invited each day to slow down and listen, because listening is the doorway to everything that matters. It enlivens the heart the way breathing enlivens the lungs. We listen to awaken our heart. We do this to stay vital and alive. This is the work of reverence, to stay vital and alive by listening deeply," unquote. Isn't that beautiful? This is the work of reverence, to stay vital and alive by listening deeply. Listening is evidence that we are here and that we're sharing what's most intimate and precious to us, which is, of course, our own attention, fully and with an open heart and mind. Most of us know what deep listening feels like. Think of something like pillow talk. Whether this pillow talk happens after sex or in bed with your kids or with a friend on the sofa or speaking to your therapist, that's irrelevant. It's the quality of closeness that matters, what Ralph Waldo Emerson called lowly listening. That deep attunement is under threat in our increasingly distracted virtual lives when our attention is being pulled in so many different directions at once. It's all we can do to keep our ears open and our eyes on the person in front of us while the phone is ringing and the TV is on and we're thinking about what we just saw on TikTok. This decrease in our ability to be fully present and witness one another in a healing way lies behind a lot of the distress and alienation and depression that we see on the rise around us. There are many, many different ways of listening. When Mark Nepo learned that there were 7,000 spoken languages on the planet, more or less, he named one of his books 7,000 Ways to Listen. If you Google deep listening, in fact, you'll find that there are a myriad of techniques and varieties for how to show up completely with another person. There's informational listening, discriminative listening, sympathetic listening, comprehensive listening, empathetic or therapeutic listening. There's critical listening, reflective listening, and there is something called appreciative listening, which is being used in the burgeoning field of nonviolent communication. These forms of skillful listening focus on particular goals and intentions. For example, in reflective listening, you hear what the other says and then you say it back to them. In discriminative listening, the listener interprets the differences and nuances of sound and body language. Special attention is paid to volume, cadence, pitch, and emphasis in speaking. The intentional listening that we're talking about today, however, is less clinical and goal-oriented and more spiritually directed. It's whole body listening, transpersonal witnessing of heart and mind without aggression, prejudice, or deception. It's the kind of listening one imagines that God might do if God were listening. When we practice this lowly listening, as Emerson described it, we discover a whole new source of wisdom. As Emerson put it, quote, "We need only obey by lowly listening and shall hear the right word. Into us flows the stream evermore of thought from we know not whence. We do not determine what we think We only open our senses, clear away as we can all obstruction from the facts, and let God think through us, unquote. When you allow God to listen through you, to think through you, there's no judgment or bias. Your ear is open, it's sensitized, it's full of compassion. There's also an impersonal quality to listening like this, which is not to say disinterested or unfeeling, just not obstructed by your ego. This teaches you to listen to yourself in the same way, to hear the voice of guidance from within you, that witness voice that's speaking behind the tangle of your conflicted thoughts and concepts and problems roiling through your mind. Emerson himself, as a matter of fact, learned this lesson the hard way. He was a very self-critical, insecure guy with a tendency to live inside his own head. And it took him a very long time to realize that he was making his life much more difficult than it needed to be. After working on lowly listening for a while, Emerson had an epiphany, and this is how he described it in his journal. Quote, "Can you believe, Waldo Emerson, that you may relieve yourself of this perpetual perplexity of choosing, and by putting your ear close to the soul, learn always the true way?" I love that. Can you believe, Waldo Emerson, that you may relieve yourself of this perpetual perplexity of choosing, and by putting your ear close to the soul, learn always the true way? That reflects what most of us hope for in life, to be relieved of the perpetual perplexity of choosing and being able to put our own ear close to our own soul, to learn the true way, to follow that deep internal guidance. For that to happen, of course, the mind needs to quiet down and settle before the witness can hear itself talk. In the process, we also learn to distinguish between the voices of wisdom in our heads and the voices of ignorance. In my guest interview this month with Dr. Pilar Jennings, I asked her how we can discern between the voices of wisdom and those that are coming from the troublemaking mind. And what Jennings said told me something that I already knew, which is that when you listen to the wisdom voice inside you, your body and your mind begin to settle. You can feel the difference in your muscles, in your gut, when you're telling the truth and when you aren't. Messages from the deep self also tend to simplify rather than complicate. They elucidate rather than obscure. Also, when we listen deeply to ourselves and get to the bottom of things, there's an inarguable quality to the insight. Do you know what I mean? Have you had that experience? When you have an insight that's very clear, very simple, it's inarguable. Right? It might not be the truth that you want, but there it is, and your body knows it. Now, listening is more than just about hearing the words. Deep listening takes in the whole picture, including the silence and the nonverbal information that comes from attending to another person with your whole being. You make space for the totality of the speaker with as little projection as possible. Now, I had an interesting experience of this with my partner, David, recently. David and I are diametrically different. We have opposite temperaments, even though we share a lot of interests as well. So one day we were having this conversation, and I was making an observation that felt really important to me. And David responded in a way that gave me the impression that he really didn't understand what I had said, either that or he just wasn't listening. So I felt this urge to correct him, to clarify my point. But then I had a realization that it was actually I who wasn't truly listening to him. David had heard what I'd said. In fact, he repeated it to me verbatim. It's just that he saw the situation differently. He heard it differently. As usual, I was focused on the principle of the thing at hand because I tend to see things philosophically, while David was focused on the details, the facts, the how such and such had taken place. Details that I found actually irrelevant, but were for him the primary things of interest. It struck me then that David has always been a tree person, focused on the specificity of things, while I tend to be a forest person, more interested in the unity, the universality, the big picture. I realized that I had been listening to him through forest ears and missing the treeness of what he was saying. This had nothing to do with his not hearing me, and a lot more to do with the fact that both of us were using the wrong set of ears to take in what the other had to say. Once we had talked about this, the tension dissolved, And truthfully, it's never come up in quite the same way again. So, when listening to others, it's imperative to ask yourself if you're using the right set of ears, not the ones with your opinions playing in the background or the ones without the capacity to take in the other's kind of music. It's worth asking yourself, who in your life do you need to hear with a different set of ears? How can you learn to take in languages that are hard for you, but necessary for the sake of love or connection? It's a very important question. We need to acknowledge that deep listening doesn't actually come naturally for the most part. Some people do it better than others, but it's really a learned skill, and it's one that we are not taught when we're young. This is another serious oversight in how we teach and learn social and emotional intelligence. We're not taught to listen. So, what are the steps in learning this skill? These steps may seem very basic, but I'd like to go over a few of them with you just to do a kind of quick review. First of all, face the speaker and maintain eye contact. Talking to someone while they scan the room or study a computer screen or gaze out the window is like trying to hit a moving target. How much of the person's undivided attention are you actually getting? If the person were your child, you might demand, look at me when I'm talking to you. But that's not the sort of thing that you say to a lover or a friend or a colleague. So, do your conversational partners the courtesy of turning to face them. Put papers, books, phone, distractions aside. Look at them, even if they don't look at you. And this is an important point. Shyness, uncertainty, shame, guilt, all kinds of emotions, along with cultural taboos, can inhibit eye contact in certain people under some circumstances. So, as a rule, it's helpful to excuse the other person, but do your best to stay focused yourself. In other words, don't interpret their lack of eye contact for something other than it is. Just focus on keeping your own. Next, be attentive, but also relaxed. Having established eye contact, you don't have to stare fixedly at the other person. You can look away now and then, you can relax, carry on like normal. The important thing is to be attentive, to take in the whole person, to use your ears, but also your eyes and also your heart. Still yourself and work on becoming comfortable and receptive. Another thing is to be aware of keeping an open mind. This is important as well. Try to listen without judging the other person or mentally criticizing the things that she is telling you. If what she says alarms you, go ahead and feel alarmed, but don't say to yourself, well, that was a stupid thing to say. Because as soon as you indulge in judgmental asides or bemusements, you compromise your effectiveness as a listener. So try to listen without jumping to conclusions. Remember that the speaker is using language to represent the thoughts and feelings going on inside her brain. You don't know what those thoughts and feelings are, and the only way you're going to find out is by listening. Next, don't be a sentence grabber. Sentence grabbers are people who can't slow down their own minds enough to listen effectively and try to speed up what the other person is saying by interrupting or by finishing their sentences. Don't interrupt and don't impose your solutions. Interrupting sends a variety of messages. It says, I'm more important than you are. What I have to say is more interesting, accurate, or relevant. I don't really care what you think. I don't have time for your opinion. Or this isn't a conversation, it's a contest, and I'm going to win. The truth is that we all think and speak at different rates. If you're a quick thinker and an agile talker, the burden is on you to relax your pace for the slower, more thoughtful communicator or the person who has trouble expressing herself. When listening to someone talk about a problem, refrain from suggesting solutions. Most of us don't want advice. We want to be heard. We'd prefer to figure out our own solutions unless we ask for advice. If you find yourself bursting with a brilliant solution, at least get the speaker's permission. You might ask, would you like to hear my ideas? And if the answer is no, leave it at that. This can be an extremely challenging spiritual practice, to hear others express things that we believe are harmful to them or others without judging them and trying to set them straight, particularly when these are close loved ones. Listening without interrupting or offering solutions can be genuinely painful. And that's why we need to pause, to take a breath, examine our own intentions, and then choose what's going to be most useful, which rarely is about coming out and telling a person that they're wrong. Another tool for deep listening is to wait for the speaker to pause and to ask clarifying questions. When you don't understand something, of course, it's appropriate to ask the speaker to explain it to you. But rather than interrupt, wait until the speaker pauses. Then say something like, back up a second, I didn't understand what you just said, or whatnot. Connected to this, be sure to only ask questions that ensure understanding. For example, if you're having lunch with someone and they're telling you about their vacation and all the wonderful things that they did, and they happen to mention running into a mutual friend, don't jump in and ask about the friend, because before you know it, you will have shifted the discussion to that other person. And 20 minutes later, their vacation and what they wanted to say to you is just a distant memory. So when you notice that your question has led the speaker astray, take responsibility for getting the conversation back on track by saying something like, it was great to hear about Alice, but tell me more about your adventure in Vermont. Next, try to feel what the speaker is feeling. Okay, we mentioned that earlier. If you feel sad when the person with whom you're talking expresses sadness, joyful when she expresses joy, fearful when she describes her fears, and then you convey those feelings through your facial expressions or words, you will be a far more effective listener. In fact, empathy is at the heart and soul of good listening. To experience empathy, you have to put yourself in the other person's place and allow yourself to feel what it's like to be her at that moment. This takes energy and concentration, but it's a generous and helpful thing to do. It facilitates communication enormously. Next, be aware of giving the speaker regular feedback. Show that you understand where the speaker is coming from by reflecting their feelings in some way. The idea is to give the speaker some proof that you're listening and that you're following their train of thought. And this is very, very important because we all know what it's like to be talking to someone who's a passive or a distracted listener who gives you nothing back, no sense of being touched or moved. There is no satisfaction or feeling of connection in that kind of conversation. It's kind of like trying to dance with a mannequin. There's nobody there. Next, pay attention to what isn't said, to nonverbal cues. Less than 10% of communication happens through what is verbalized. We glean much more information about each other without saying a single word. Even over the phone, you can learn almost as much about the person you're speaking to from their tone and the cadence of voice from anything that she says. Face to face with a person, you can detect enthusiasm, boredom, or irritation very quickly in the expression around the eyes, the set of the mouth, the slope of the shoulders. These are cues that you can't really ignore. So, putting these listening skills into practice can transform our relationships. It transforms how we attend to ourselves and to that still small voice within that is trying to guide us through our own lives and in those moments when we're trying to connect with others. So if you practice listening skills and look at it as a practice, it can deepen your camaraderie and your trust with others. It can heal old schisms and misunderstandings, and can also put you in touch with that power of witnessing as an essential part of your spiritual path. So, Jay, why don't we pull up the card and we'll do a little bit of writing about deep listening. Here we go. I'd like you to take 15 minutes now to write about if you could listen to yourself through God's ears, if you could listen to yourself the way God listens, what would you hear today? What would you hear? Be as specific as you can be, please. We'll take 15 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back together as a group.